Good evening, everyone, if you are from India. Otherwise, good morning, good afternoon, whatever that may be. And a warm welcome to today's session that we are having. I am really grateful that you are here because we are going to get into a very engaging talk. So, this is a two-part streaming that we are going to have, and part one is what we are going to discuss today. So, I am Colonel Rajiv Bhargav, and I have been with the Indian Army for more than 23 years. Thereafter, I did an MBA with ISB, and I was with ISB for over 13 years, in which I started two courses and many other things. Now, I am running my own company, and I am into leadership coaching as well as business storytelling workshops, among other things. Well, I was always intrigued by the fact that leadership can be best learned by observing people at a global stage, geopolitics, because decisions taken there affect millions of people. And what can be a better way of learning that? And that is why we have today's topic, which is black gold, white lies, and the war for power. Very interesting, I must say, and I am sure that you are going to like this. And what we are going to cover in this session, as I said, it is a two part. Tomorrow, we are having the second part at the same time at 7 p.m. And we will go back to how it all started. Where did oil start? Number two, how the seven sisters ran the world's oil till OPEC took over. Well, interesting, right? Seven sisters. Any of you have heard of this term in terms of oil? If yes, you can just put in the chat yes or why. And if you have not, just put in N for no. Okay, let's move ahead. Then we'll talk about the 1973 oil shock. The day oil became a weapon much more potent than the rifles and the bombs. Then we talk about the Petrodollar Deal that made the US dollar something irreplaceable. How fracking gave America energy independence. And of course, then the cliffhanger, that one player that no one ever saw coming. Okay, all right. So let's go to where it all began. Not every war was all about oil, but oil was never far from the battlefield. You will agree with me there. So let's go ahead. Let's start with a bang. Well, what you saw was the Tomahawk missiles, one of the latest US missiles which were launched on Iran, and they had some very, very lethal effect. So let's go to where it all began in 1901. Yes, God's year of 1901. And there we bring in somebody who is known as William Knox Darcy. He was a British millionaire and he wanted to invest in oil. He had some very good ideas about how to make oil work. And so he reached out to the Shah of Persia. And they hammered out an agreement where his company, that is Williams' company, was allowed to prospect for 60 years. And in return, he had to give a measly sum of 20,000 pounds as also about 16% of future revenues. So, well, the prospecting started very much into, as I may say, that in very earnest. And you can see this is the original agreement which was there. You can see William's name as also the date, 30th month, 5th month, 30th day, 1901. That was the when this was signed. Well, he went on and hired George Bernard Reynolds, a forgotten pioneer actually of oil discoveries. George Bernard Reynolds had one thing in that was of, he was passionate about oil, absolutely passionate about searching for oil. And in those days, let me tell you, prospecting was a nightmare, absolute nightmare. And why so? Well, simply because they were bandits, they were chieftains, all right, who never honored the Shah's rule. There were insects of various types, reptiles. Temperature went above 50 degrees centigrade at times. And of course, that topped up was the water scarcity, as one may put in. All right. So, well, William faced tremendous losses in this. Okay. And so much so that the British Admiralty started getting concerned that this guy may lose heart. So they didn't want Russians or others to come and take over. So they said, okay, let us intervene so that William does not lose heart and he continues with the prospecting. So then it was like a Hollywood scene. A British spy by the name of Sidney Riley, sorry, reportedly disguised as a priest, and convinced DRC, or William as we also call it, to sell a majority stake to Burma Oil, which he did. He sold a stake to Burma Oil, but that did not stop them for losing further, money, because there was no oil to be found. William Reynolds continued searching, continued prospecting, but they never found any oil. And by the time it was 1908, the syndicate had lost, can you imagine, in those days, 500,000 pounds. And no, we are all ordinary mortals. So by April 1908, they decided to let's call it a day, okay, to wind up the project. That's what they thought. So what happens now? They send a telegram to Reynolds. So that time he was prospecting in an area which we called as known as Masjid-e-Sharif, and he was doing his prospecting out there. They sent a telegram on 16th of May 1908 asking him to end production. But rotten eggs, yes, the smell of rotten eggs changed history. At times we are surprised as to how and what makes a difference. Rotten egg smell changed history for the world. Maybe that battle that we are seeing today between Iran and USA may have never been fought if that smell of rotten eggs was not there. Let me explain. So on 16th May, as I said, Burma Oil sent a telegram to Reynolds to shut operations at Masjid-e-Sulaiman, which was the drilling site. But the telegram also read, stop production, fire the staff, dismantle everything, and come home. I mean, it could not have been more clearer. But Reynolds, what had happened? He delayed following the orders because there was a strong egg smell, rotten egg smell on the drilling site. And he said, I can't just go in there. Let me wait a bit till that smell goes off. So he waited a few days. And you know what happened? On 26th May at 0400 hours, oil shot up high into the Iranian sky. And it was surprising. This was the first commercial strike ever in the Middle East. That 50-foot gusher actually changed the history of the world. See how things matter, how things make a difference. So, this is the image of George Bernard Reynolds at Masjid e Suleiman in 1908 with two colleagues by the name of Crush and Villains. Well, they really crushed it, right? So that's how it was. And what happened after that? So this was in 1908, and thereafter, Burma Oil sprung up another company by the name of Anglo Persian Oil Company. And this company had a majority stake of the British government. And that is how the British government gained a foothold in the Arabian area in the Middle East for getting oil. And later on, in 1955, this very company became British Petroleum, whom we have all heard of a lot, if I may say, right? You will agree to that. Now, let me come to two aspects which consolidated the Americans as well as the British into the Middle East for their oil. Now, these stories are great. Let me tell you, both the stories. Let's start with the British first, right? So, what happened was that Winston Churchill was the admiral of the British Navy at that time. This was in the 1920s and earlier 1950s onwards, 1915 and onwards. So he was now the person who was in charge of the British complete navy. And he noticed one thing, that the navy could do much better if their propulsion can be changed from coal to oil. It had a lot of benefits. We'll not go there. And this he was able to drive through. And the strategy was changed, that entire ships of the British Navy converted to oil. And that generated a big demand for oil. Big demand. And where will the oil come from? The Middle East, right? From that same oil field which they had identified, and thereafter there was a lot of drilling further and a lot of oil was found. Okay, so that is how the British were able to get it. Now, the Americans, when they got in, it was something even more Hollywood style. Absolute Hollywood, huh? I'll explain. So, this was the towards the end of the Second World War. Now, the Americans and the British were allies, as you are aware, and the Americans said that we will not, they honored that in the Middle East, wherever the British were there, they said that we will not come and prospect out there, right? We will, we'll take a foot back. However, on the clandestine, America was worried about, they knew that oil was very important and they wanted oil for themselves. So, on behind the British people's back, America courted Saudi Arabia, right? FD Roosevelt, who was known for his warmth with dignitaries and his ability to close deals, he charmed the Saudi king and won US access to oil. How? The king was, of course, Abdulaziz bin Saud. And what happened was on February 14th, 1945, he invited, it was, of course, a secret wartime meeting. He invited in Suez Canal aboard a US Navy destroyer. He invited the king for negotiations and discussions. The king, along with an entourage of 45 people, as also goats, as what he said, and some other food, entire chef and other people for his food, he came. And there was a discussion on the Navy destroyer in Suez Canal. Now, as I said, FDR charmed him. A budding friendship developed. And FDR also gifted to the king a wheelchair, a wheelchair. FDR was later, after this, in 8 weeks, FDR was to die. However, the king carried that chair forever. You know that FDR was a handicapped person, so he always had chairs. And the king also was not doing well, so this chair helped him. And he kept it next to him in the palace. And whosoever came, he used to say, "This has been gifted to me by FDR, by Roosevelt." And this cemented a relationship which was to go on for years altogether. And of course, that fear of oil shortage, which caused USA to get into this, but it ensured that US access to Saudi oil reserves was there for generations. Okay, you know what happened? Here is the story that Winston Churchill, when he came to know that US had interacted with the king Abdul Aziz bin Saud, he also wanted a piece of the pie. So he invited the king. Well, the king came to the British also. But here, Winston Churchill, by his constant smoking, he used to smoke a lot, these cigars and drinks and other things. And he continued that in the presence of the king. And it is stated, it is reported that the king got offended. And their relationship never got into the level which it was with FDR. So it's a lesson for all of us that when you are negotiating with someone, better learn to know their culture, to know their likes, their dislikes. It pays handsomely, if I may say. Okay. Now we are clear as to how the British and the Americans gained a foothold. And of course, after FDR and the king were there, then what happened was number of American companies came in. There was a lot of drilling done. There was a lot of partnerships which were done. But the FDR's meeting in Suez Canal on a naval destroyer set the tone for everything. So let's move ahead. The big oil. Yes, it was the seven sisters, right, of oil who started dominating the entire Middle East. Can you imagine? You are at home and somebody comes and takes over your home from you and doesn't let you manage even moving a chair from one place to other. How would you feel? And that is what the seven sisters did. Right? Who are these seven sisters? First, I'll explain what they will do, but let's first see the seven sisters. These were five American companies, one British company, and one Anglo-Dutch company. They set the prices, they did the production, they did everything. The producing nations had zero say. So these companies were Standard Oil NJ, which is now ExxonMobil, again Standard Oil CA, which is now Chevron, Texaco is again a part of Chevron, Gulf Oil is part of Chevron and BP, Mobil is now ExxonMobil, British Petroleum is now popularly known as BP, and the Royal Dutch Shell is known by Shell. Now these were the seven companies. They were the feudal lords who owned the land, set the rent, and they were the tenants, and they paid whatever they liked. Imagine. So how over these years, from 40s to 60s, these companies set up mechanism that they captured everything, all possible profits and everything. How did they go about that? Of course, first, you have seen how they secured concessions, obtained long-term rights to explore and produce oil. Then they started influencing the prices. They started controlling the prices, which impacted the revenues of the producers. They had total control. Let me tell you, you will not, if you have to be there to understand. The poor producers, the countries, the Saudi Arabia, the Iran, they had no say. And then they controlled the entire movement of oil. The shipping, the refining, the marketing, the entire process was controlled by these seven sisters. And they captured the downstream margins. Okay, when they were sold, they retained the entire profits from refining and marketing. And of course, they kept the producers dependent. You know, they maintained, as they say, that they maintained full control. Producers, governments, reliance on their infrastructure was too much. See, how did they do it? They had the expertise, the technical people. So without the people from these companies, the oil fields would not have generated anything. So they purposely kept the Iranians and the Saudis, the locals, at a lower level, as as laborers and others. All the technical and other details were the Britishers and the Americans and so on. That's how they did everything, and then they controlled everything. So now what happened? Mohammad Mossadegh, the Prime Minister of Iran in 1951 to 53. You know what? This guy was the one who changed the layout of the system. He said, enough is enough, right? And he said that, okay, we will nationalize the oil. He turned oil from a business issue into a battle over sovereignty, right? In March 1951, he nationalized the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. You have heard about that company, right? I told you. He nationalized it. That what does that mean? That the Britishers, the Americans, and the other Europeans, all their infrastructure, every every aspect other than people was taken over by the state. And this was a big shock to the Seven Sisters, right? They abandoned the oil fields. Not a drop of oil was produced from all these fields. And Mossadegh had a tough time explaining to others as to what is to be done. Okay. And to top it off, in 1953, Mossadegh lost power in a coup and he was imprisoned for life and later on had to die in that imprisonment. And it is said that this coup was the brainchild of the Britishers, the Britishers and the CIA, the Americans. Many Iranians consider this to be a symbol of Western betrayal. Foreign powers reasserted control over Iranian oil because the Shah Pahlavi came back after 1953 in the government and he was pro-Western. And these foreign powers were able to take control of Iranian oil. You see what a drama this is, isn't it? That is how oil has been able to impact the lives of nations. And we shall see even more as we go ahead. Now, let's talk about the power shift. See what happened. You have seen how they have started controlling everything. Even after nationalization, they were able to change the prime minister and get back to their profiting ways. Okay. So now there was a power shift coming in, and that was the OPEC, Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. Okay. How did this happen? So in 1959, these seven sisters, they did something which sparked. That was the ultimate spark. It was the ultimate spark, as they say. And that was, they decided to cut prices for the entire Middle Eastern crude by 10% in 59, whatever be their reason. And zero consultation with the governments of these Middle East. And this was the last, they say that broke everything. So then it was decided 5 nations they met in Baghdad and said, enough. The seventh, as I said, in 1959, the Seven Sisters posted prices for Middle Eastern crude by 10% with zero consultations. And on 14th September 1960, OPEC was the world's first act of collective sovereignty over natural resources. They said, it is our country, it is our oil, and we will decide what is going to happen. We are the masters of our own commodity. The day of the oil company telling us what our oil is worth is over. And this was said by Abdul Tariqi, who was Saudi Arabia's first oil minister. He was also known as the Red Sheikh, the man who pushed hardest for OPEC's formation. Right? So that is how OPEC was formed. And it slowly and steadily started taking over and became more influential, started taking over control. So right from 1960 onwards, that is when these people started. So how? Let's see. So in 1940, actually much earlier in 1949, Venezuela and Iran had began talks that yeah, this is enough. I mean, we are having a real tough time with these guys. We have to nationalize or do something so that it makes a difference. And of course, as you are aware, we discussed Seven Sisters cut prices by 10% in February 1959. And in September 1960, OPEC was founded and set up in Baghdad with five nations. And in 1968, there was this sovereignty declaration over all resources by OPEC. So slowly between 60 and 68, OPEC steadily started enhancing their influence. And by 1975, OPEC had 13 members and their secretariat was in Vienna. So these were the timelines of members. In 1960, you have Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela. Yes, Venezuela was a founding member. You all heard about recent happenings of Venezuela. Okay. So, and in 1962, Libya joined. 1967, UAE joined. 1969, it was Algeria. 71, Nigeria. 2017 was Equatorial Guinea. 2018 Congo, and 2023 again it was Guinea was joined. So that is how they got formed, and this became a cartel which it is the first official cartel which was made so that their own property, their own resources were not taken over by somebody else. And in this time, the impact of these seven sisters obviously had gradually petered down, although USA and Britain continued to be important members. Okay, now we are going to enter a different stage altogether, and that is the weaponization of oil. Okay, can anyone tell me? And you can just put it in the chat. What happened in 1973? What was that weaponization that took place? What happened in 1973 that made that difference? It's a pivoting mode. We changed the way countries looked at oil. You know that? Absolutely pivoting. Okay, let's move on. The Arabs were actually the first people who weaponized oil. You'll be surprised. Arabs were the first people. And how? You see, the Yom Kippur War. This was a war which the Arab nations, they, in a surprise mode, attacked Israel in October 1973. And Initially, of course, they because of the surprise they were leading the battle, but later on, Israel was able to defeat that entire consortium. US backed Israel with arms and supplies. And as a result, the OPEC members declared full oil embargo on US, Netherlands, and the UK. See what happened? Long petrol queues in New York and London. Factories got shut and stagflation gripped the West. There was humiliation amongst the people that they had to stand in lines. The price of oil increased by 400% in 3 months. The per barrel from $3 it became $12. And the entire embargo was about 5 to 6 months. And up to 6% was the GDP loss of USA due to stagflation. And for the first time in history, oil was wielded as a geopolitical weapon. You see that impact? That was really something. And what happened? The United States as well as UK, they understood that they just can't stand by, right? Henry Kissinger stated after the 1973 embargo that oil is much too important a commodity to be left in the hands of the Arabs. How true it later on turned out to be. And that is what led to a step by USA which changed everything. It was a brilliant masterstroke by Kissinger and Nixon. A brilliant masterstroke. You know what that was? The Petrodollar Deal of 1974. See, up to 1971, the US dollar was anchored to gold. And there were a number of other countries who also pegged on to US dollar and on to gold. And what it implied was that in case whatever somebody has a US dollar, if he wants to encash, then USA would give them a percentage amount of gold based on the exchange rates which were established. But then gold prices became very, very costly, very high. And so Nixon, which is known as the Nixon shock, in 1971, he he removed the gold standard. Okay. And the dollar became floating without any anchorage. America was in need of an anchor for the dollar, right? And then came the masterstroke, as we say. USA reached out to Saudi Arabia. Their relationship was strong as it is. FDR, Suez Canal, wheelchair, you're aware. So they said to Saudi Arabia that we will give you military equipment and security guarantees. You see, at that time in the Middle East, there was a lot of politics going on, a lot of turning around, getting things done, and the countries were all very wary of each other. All these countries, and so when Saudi Arabia got this that okay, USA will support them in terms of security and military equipment, they jumped for it because it made a huge difference. And in return, what they gave USA was that prices of all oil exports, all prices would be in US dollars. What a masterstroke by USA. And you know that Saudi Arabia was the biggest oil producer at that time. And they were the leaders of OPEC. Okay, and once they did that, the result was that a permanent global demand for US dollars was cemented, right? And by 1975, all OPEC members started pricing their oil in dollars, and the system was complete. And you see the benefit which USA got. It was the petrodollar flywheel. See what happens? Oil is sold in US dollars. Every barrel is priced in dollars. Nations obviously they need US dollar to purchase oil. Everyone needs oil. And they need US dollars to purchase oil, regardless of whichever is their own currency. OPEC earns US dollars. There's a huge surplus of dollars with OPEC, hundreds of billions of dollars which they accumulate. So, what do they do with that? Any guesses? Any guesses, anyone? What do they do with these dollars? Before I go ahead, you can just type in. It would be interesting if you can just type in. Well, they invested in US treasuries. Win win for USA. Their dollars earned by the OPEC and reinvested in USA. And the US government had cheap funds that were available to them. And US was able to have a global hegemony. They borrowed cheap, sanctioned freely. We will see that in the next slide as to how the USA was able to take advantage of the petrodollar. Right? First, cheap borrowing. US can borrow at lower rates due to high demand for dollars. Okay, they can borrow very cheaply. Point number two, US can print money without causing any inflation domestically. You see, if it is your own country, if consumption is within the country, if you keep printing money, there will be too much of money and the value of money will go down. But if it is a global scenario, there is just no problem, right? And the third thing was, which even now they are doing, they can isolate countries from global trade by cutting their US dollar access, sanctions. And that is how USA has been using it in a big way. They have made countries bend to their will by just that power of petrodollars. Military funding. US can maintain a vast global military presence due to low cost borrowing that is available to them. And this is the masterpiece, Swift control. You may have heard of Swift, that is the medium through which money is exchanged. When Russia attacked Ukraine, and that time the Americans had put a control over the Swift transactions by Russia. Okay, so they can freeze the financial assets of any country by using this. Do you see? And let me tell you one thing now. Today's battle with Iran in Venezuela and any other battle by USA, they may call it anything. They may say nuclear, they may say leadership change, but the heart of everything is the petrodollar. They want their petrodollar to continue because that, as long as petrodollar continues, they have a sort of control of the entire universe. They are the gundas, they are the dadas, and everyone else has to, do that. So then, what was the great power play from 1973 to 2008 when in 1973 OPEC had revolutionized, weaponized oil, and then how America struck back? Let us see very quickly. Okay. So 1973, it was the OPEC embargo, Yom Kippur War. Oil rose from $3 to $12. There were huge lines across Western countries for petrol. So 1974, US got into this petrodollar deal, and that was a masterstroke. Then in 1979 was the second oil shock. It was the Iran Revolution. Iran-Iraq war took place in a big way, and oil became scarce. It peaked at $35 per barrel. And in 1981, what happened? Reagan, that time the president of USA, he countered. See, OPEC used to be 50%. The share of entire oil used to be 15%, which was oil which was produced. By deregulating, That is, Reagan, what he did was America was by itself a very big, substantial producer of oil. As also they controlled many other places in Africa and others. So what happened was he deregulated oil, and OPEC's share came down from 50% to 29%, and that flooded. The oil came in a big way, and the prices of oil came down. Next, 1985 to 86. Now, most of you may not have heard of this. What I am going to tell you now, something very very important. It was the kill shot. See, Saudi Arabia flooded the market with oil. They had their own reasons. We don't have the time to get into that. But what they did was they flooded the market with oil. And the oil came down from $31 to $10 per barrel. And at that time, the USSR, not Russia, USSR, their entire earnings for the country used to be from oil. By this price reduction, they lost $20 billion, and this was a major contributor to the reason why Soviet Union collapsed and Russia was born, because the $20 billion loss brought USSR to its knees. Most of us are not aware of this aspect. Then in 2003 to 2008, China and India started growing in a big way. The dollar, the oil was in huge demand, and it reached $145 a barrel. Imagine that. OPEC earned $1 trillion at that time. And then what happened was another twist in the history of oil, a big twist, and that was shale revolution. USA used technology to generate oil in a different way, and it became slowly the top producer of oil in the world. Saw that? Okay, so four things I want to tell you before you move ahead. 1973, you saw OPEC's thunderclap. 1974, we saw America's coup for petrodollars. In 79 to 86, crashing of USSR by the reduction of oil price. And in 2008, it was the shale revolution. Right. So let us come to America's counterattacks, that fracking or shale revolution as we call. What exactly is that? So this was in Texas in 2008. Till now, drilling for oil was done where the drills were put in vertically, and the oil layer used to be thin, and so there was this very limited space to generate oil. And in USA, there were shale layers which were very rich in oil, but they were thin layers. So this technology, which got commercialized in 2008, it involved a drill going vertically up to, as you can see out here, up to the shale layer, and then turning 90 degrees in that horizontally. Imagine. And as a result, they had a huge area where oil was. And what they did out there, there were holes in these pipes, and water was, that's what is fracking. Water was made to come in at extreme high pressure. Now, this water caused cracking in the shale layer, and as a result of that cracking, oil was released. That oil came and merged with the water, and because it is lighter than water, oil rose to the surface, and where it was taken away. So this was the fracking revolution which took place. And what happened? American production, which was 4.9 million barrels per day, by 2019 it became 12.8 million barrels per day. from 4.9 to 12.98. It became the world's number one producer of oil. Can you believe that? And there was an increase of 161% over this period. And you may ask, why only America? Why there was shale, which is there in China also. There is shale in other countries. But why only in America? Well, there are four reasons. See, in America, the owner of the land has right over what is even underground, which is there only in America. Unique. So this created millions of risk-taking micro entrepreneurs. Then venture capitalists and PE funded risky shale startups, they really grew because no government approval was needed. Pipelines and refineries which were existing for conventional oil were repurposed for low cost for fracking. And enforceable contracts and predictable permits allowed 10 years investment plans. The legal system in America was very stable. And that was, I think, that was the major cause why, because legally they were strong, people were strong, that they were able to carry on. So let's see what after that happens. US production we have already seen. It has grown like anything. And there is this bar chart which shows you one in blue or gray is 2007 and one in golden color is 2024. You can see that USA grew to number one position in terms of oil, way far ahead. Russia and Saudi Arabia were almost equal, Canada and then Iraq. So by the shale revolution, USA was able to turn the tables and become the largest producer of oil in the world. Okay, so let's see a diagram. These are the oil prices right from 2016 to 2026. And we can see that every time there was a change in the price of oil, it was due to a global geopolitical incident or a geopolitical incident caused a change in price. As you can see, the Vienna Agreement, when OPEC Plus was formed. Okay, I'll be describing this to you about OPEC Plus, which was in December 2016. So they controlled the oil. Then in 2018, let me tell you, this OPEC was a strange animal. They, although they were a cartel, but they often cheated on each other. There was a quota given for producing oil. No one, adhered to that quota. They produced more, and as a result, their effective bargaining got less. And surprisingly, there was no punishment for anyone who was doing this. They had their own reasons, but that is how OPEC functioned. Then there was a price war. Russia, this was in 2020. There was a big price war. OPEC was controlled by Saudi Arabia. In OPEC Plus was Russia. Russia and Saudi Arabia were the big producers of oil, and they constantly fought each other. So that's how it continued. In 2022, again there was post-Ukraine cuts in oil, and that resulted in oil reaching more than $100 per barrel. And thereafter, it continued the way it is. And now in 2026, the oil is again touching $100 mark. That is how you see geopolitics and oil prices work together, sometimes against each other. That is how these things functioned. So these were the OPEC core members and the non-OPEC partners as OPEC plus. That continues till today. Let's move ahead. The shale revolution, as we can see, has its winners and losers. USA was a big winner, became the world's largest producer. Trade deficit improved, sanction power amplified. Europe was again a big winner because US LNG was made available to them. India was also a better winner because better negotiating leverage it had. OPEC was a loser, Russia was a loser, Iran and Venezuela were losers, and Saudi Arabia was a loser. Right? So, what were the 6 leadership lessons that we can have from these? See, the Seven Sisters era, you should not control people, control the process. They started controlling people and there was a rebellion. If you see the OPEC formation, the advantage of being together really makes a huge, huge difference. As you can see, collective power transforms the powerless into powerful. OPEC was able to put the Seven Sisters into oblivion. Of course, then OPEC also made its mistakes. They were not, what I should say, foolproof. They were not so effective. They started cheating on each other. Okay. Then 1973 oil embargo by the Arabs on the Americans and others, which resulted in a lot of dependencies. So what it is the dependency is always vulnerable. Never let one supplier own you. Never ever. The petrodollar deal. The best deal is the one which binds both sides in mutual need. Saudi Arabia was in need of military hardware, weapons, and security. America was in need of pegging the US dollar, anchoring it to something, and they both scratched each other's back. See, again, OPEC quota cheating. See, incentives. So, if you have heard about the prisoner's dilemma, where everyone goes for their own benefit maximum, that had played up in a big way. But the fact is that your incentives must align. If they don't, the best of organizations, the discipline will collapse. And that is a issue which is something which I must say is a problem. Then, of course, the shale revolution. Technology disrupts the most entrenched power structures, and that too fast. Imagine how USA was able to change the entire geopolitics by two things. One, of course, we have discussed it enough. It was the petrodollar. And the other aspect is how they were able to have shale production, whatever be the reasons they had. We discussed 4 reasons, right? Why shale revolution happened only in USA. But they were able to make a huge, huge impact on oil. And today, that's what we are going to discuss in the next session, is as to how the petrodollar of USA has started losing ground. And that has shaken up USA more than anything else in the world. All their activities, all their happenings today are because of petrodollar. And of course, there is the player that we have not yet talked about. Well, while America was fracking in Texas, while OPEC was cutting deals with Russia, right? We discussed how Saudi Arabia and Russia, They were both interacting with each other. And this Russia I'm talking about is not USSR. This was later on in 2016 and beyond, where Saudi Arabia and Russia were actually pivoting and fighting for gaining control over each other. So that is how this interaction took place. Then, while the petrodollar had the world in its grip, one nation was quietly building the infrastructure to make every rule we just discussed absolutely obsolete. Yes, just one nation was making that happen. Of course, you know by now that that nation is China. In session 2, we are going to discuss the dragon, the yuan, and the end of oil age, which is what we are going to come to next. See, there's a very good saying that the Stone Age did not end because the world ran out of stones, and the oil age will not end because we run out of oil. That's what China says. But this quote particularly is by Sheikh Ahmad Zaki Yamani, the Saudi oil minister from 1962 to 1986. And this he mentioned in the 1970s, but is much more applicable as on today. We will see you in session 2, the dragon, the yuan, and the end of the oil age. That is tomorrow. You should subscribe to this channel. We are going to have a lot more such sessions, as we can see. But if there are any questions, I am open. You can just type in the chat box, and I would love to answer you about this. There is a delay of about 15 to 20 seconds always, and that delay does affect us, but if you know that that delay is there, we are able to manage. So if there are any questions, do put it in the chat box. I would love to be there with you. I'm waiting for exactly 20 seconds, because in that 20 seconds, will your question, if there is any, it will come up. Anyway, thank you. So this was a wonderful session that we have had, and I do hope that you all will be there for the next session. That is even more interesting as to how the oil politics is playing in current times. You are aware, the Strait of Hormuz was declared open yesterday. Today morning it was open by Indian Standard Time. By today afternoon, it has been closed again by Iran. Thank you, Tarman, for your very nice statement that it was all about history, geopolitics, and leadership, how they were connected with each other. You just hit the nail on the head. Absolutely. So, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your attention, for attending this. And I really appreciate your presence. And if I would be grateful if we all are present again tomorrow at 7 p.m. So, till then, bye, take care, and thank you.